All right, I want to talk a little bit today about sword harmonics and the sweet spot. Okay, a thing that's been known about swords for a long time, and it was even written about in Burton's Book of the Sword, and I believe mentioned in writing as early as the 19th century, was a thing called the sweet spot, which is a place on the blade where you lose the least amount of force when you strike an object, okay? And typically, the way people have found this sweet spot is you slap the palm and you watch the blade vibrate. And you see that right here, there's a spot that's not wiggling, right? Okay? So generally it is considered that that is the best place to hit an object in that the sword will lose as little power as possible to vibration. All right, and this is especially important for European swords that tend to be, you know, thinner and longer and less stiff than other swords like katana or things like that. So the thinner and the longer the sword is, the more important it is for you to understand harmonics and have them right. Now, a thing that I've noticed is, while this is a pretty good test, and we'll tell you about where it's at, when you hit an object, the majority of the force is not traveling, you know, this way through the blade. It's, you know, like when you slap the palm. It's actually strikes here, so it would travel this way through the blade. And there's a big difference in what you're going to feel as far as harmonics and resistance and stiffness when you go across the width of the blade versus across the thickness of the blade, right? So I thought about that, and I've come up with a test that I use to tell me where the harmonic sweet spot is on the blade, and that I actually like better than that. What I do is I take the sword and I come down to a stump, or, you know, a cutting stand, or some solid wooden object that's firmly supported on the ground, and you simply hold the sword like this, loose with this hand. This hand's not pushing or anything like that. And you just hold it a couple inches above, and you drop it. Now you see that, you can see that out here on the tip, the sword bounces quite a lot. And that's normal. Pretty much every sword is going to be like that. But as I go further down the blade, you can see that the bouncing lessens until you get to the point where it's basically landing and not bouncing at all, right? So what I like to do is I like to mark this. Okay, that's about where it's at. And I keep pressing down the blade, right? And we're still having basically no bounce. Okay, there's a tiny bit of a vibration starting here, okay? And now it's bounced a little bit more. Okay, so what we've got here is what we consider a sweet spot on this blade that goes from about here to about here, right? And what I have found in the cutting I've done is that the larger this sweet spot is on a sword, the greater amount of force is transferred from the blade to the target, and the more powerfully the sword will cut. With some swords, especially you know, cheaper mass production type swords, you'll get sweet spots that are, you know, maybe this big. They're just one single point on the blade, or you'll get a spot. Sometimes you'll get them where they never actually completely drop dead. They always got a little bit of a bounce, right? And that's as good as they get. And those swords do not cut as well as the swords that have a good, strong sweet spot that lands and sticks and is large, you know. So sometimes when you get a sword that has a very long sweet spot, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches long, you know, that sword is going to be very, very powerful in the cut, because it gives you a wide area where you can hit your target and have very little to no loss in power. And also, the rest of the blade is going to be closer to harmonically sweet, you know, because it's not as far away from the sweet spot. You know what I mean? It's so basically, the bigger the sweet spot, the better the whole sword cuts. And you know, it also happens, it also works, especially if your edge alignment is off a little bit, right? If your edge alignment's off a little bit, you're going to get flexing, you're going to get deflection, you're going to lose power no matter what. But if you hit in that sweet spot, the vibration that happens right there at that spot is lesser, and so you've got more ability to power through and make the cut work in spite of you know, a little bit of bad edge alignment. So another thing is, a sword that has a very large sweet spot tends to be a little more forgiving of technique. Okay, so this is one of the things I use to judge how powerful or how efficient a sword is going to be at cutting. Another thing you want to look at with harmonics, because you know, harmonics are all about vibration and all about how, you know, the forces move through the sword. And if we go back to this test, we'll see that there's not just one spot here that sits still, but there's also a spot down here. In this case, it's right here, where the sword also has a harmonic sweet spot right there. And that's important too, because when you strike a hard object, that shock wave is going to come through the sword. And if you're holding on to a part that moves like this, you're going to feel that wiggling in your hand, and it's going to sting, it's going to hurt, it's going to maybe even jump out of your hand. And I think it's pretty easy to understand how that's a bad thing. So how do you affect this? Well, the way you affect where the sweet spots are on the sword is through mass distribution. Your profile taper, which is the shape of the profile of the blade, as well as your distal taper, which is the shape of your thickness, and the weight of your pommel and how far your pommel is from where you grip it. Okay, all these things affect the harmonic nodes and how the sword vibrates. And if you get these things right, you know, the better job you do at balancing everything out, the larger sweet spot you get, the better the placement of the node and the handle is. Sometimes you can get the node on the blade to work its way out further towards the point. That's generally a good thing, as that means you can cut with the good part of the blade further out away from you. So it's all about mass distribution, and of course mass distribution comes down to your tapers, both profile and distal, and then you fine tune it with the pommel. And that's really what the pommel's all about, is fine tuning the way the sword works. But that's a whole different conversation. So for right now, I just wanted to let everyone know that there's been some questions. People asked, "Hey Tom, you know, what's the sweet spot you're talking about? What's this harmonics and these harmonic nodes?" And this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a blade node in harmonics. I'm talking about a hilt node in harmonics. I'm talking about a sweet spot on the blade. Okay. These are the terms I use. Other makers may use different terms. They may talk about them differently. That's fine. That's their thing. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about a blade. All right. That's what I came here to talk to you guys about today. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you later.